as just exploring the senses here. We do such a good job of making whole life out of the mind just one sliver of how we might relate to reality, and yet there are all these other luscious, glorious senses waiting to be awakened and embraced and felt and seen, and the world known through. And it strikes me that there is a kind of ego to everything. Every worldview, every culture, every person, every energy. And that's part of what holds things together, self-perpetuates, and it's also what we often struggle with. And so the power of the mind has its own ego. And as we look at life, it becomes the filter for the stories that we tell. One of the great stories that we tell in the spiritual world is the story of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. And as I experience the world through my senses, I hear stories differently. In fact, sometimes I might even say that I imagine that some stories have been misunderstood. Now that's just my perspective. Maybe you have a different one. The short version of the Buddha story, the really short version of the Buddha story, is usually something like this. A divine-born child came to a queen, and because there was a prophecy that he might become either a great king and ruler or a great sage, his family protected him from experiencing suffering in the real world. But he somehow broke free, saw the truth of our suffering, ran from his rich and royal life, and eventually, through great spiritual practice, awakened to the impermanence of all that he was raised with, that there is such a thing as awakening, as oneness. But that's a really short version. And that kind of retelling, which is not unlike the telling of many of the stories of the great masters, often leaves us with the feeling that where he came from needed to be overcome. Right? The riches, the greed, the gold, the dancers. He had to leave it all behind and see its impermanence. But that's not really the story to me, actually. If we go a little deeper into the story, and of course, the deeper you go into any story, the more you see about yourself, about life, about everything. We go into the story of this divine-born child into the kingdom, and yes, the prophecy, great king and ruler, great sage and transformer of consciousness, and yes, given every lavish gift of the senses, foods unimaginable, fragrances unimaginable, all the beauty, sensuality, and physical gifts you could possibly imagine. And yes, a desire from the king to keep Gautama from seeing all that's out there. Well, there's lots of stories about how he eventually got out beyond the walls, but one of the most common versions is that he demanded and demanded and demanded to see what was going on. He could tell there was more to life than what he was being shown, something that many of us have felt. And so his father arranged for a tour of the city. But very carefully so. You know the story, the streets were lined with beautiful people, young people, all the old people, the sick people, the dying people were hidden away. Kind of like Instagram. Kind of like your Facebook account. kind of like media. It was sanitized. But they say that, life persists. And so one way or another, he saw through the crowds, he separated from the chaperones, and eventually came into contact with a frail, aging person. Came face to face with a sick person, a dying person. And they say that this is what fueled the fire of his departure. He left his beautiful wife. He left his son. Yes, the Buddha was a deadbeat dad. And he went out into the forest. And he studied with all the great masters he could find. All the great ascetics and spiritual adepts. And he lived without food, and he lived without clothes, and he lived without breath, and he lived without anything and everything you can think of. He was kind of like the ultimate modern spiritual seeker. He tried everything. Signed up for every workshop, read every book, went to every teacher. Sounds like me. And then, like me, his Jewish mother called and said, "What? No. Where was I?" And so he cast himself into the opposite world from which he was born. The absolute denial of the body, the denial of the senses. And a lot of people think, not knowing the full story, that was what led him to his final enlightenment, but that wasn't, right? Because some of you know the story. One day, this is the way I kind of see it, he pulled himself up from the ground after another night of foodless, waterless, contentless meditation. Could barely catch a breath through his frailty. And there on the river, passing by where he lay, a boat with a musician giving a lesson to a student. And they were tuning the instrument in that moment. And the teacher said to the student, "Now be careful, because if you loosen the string too much, it doesn't play at all. And if you tighten the string too much, it breaks." And the Buddha thought, "Oh, damn. That's it. It's not this extreme sacrifice of the self, demeaning every sense and physical quality I have. And it's not all the opulence either. It's balance, the middle way. To be awake and alive between the worlds." And his final awakening came when he sat at the foot of a fig tree, and in reuniting with the earth, not a cosmic being, not a celestial being, but Mother Earth, there he sat and witnessed the unfolding of life, his lives, his senses awake, understanding the whole universe through that place and that moment. Every forest inside that tree, every ocean inside that tree, every galaxy inside that tree, inside him. He touched the earth as his witness of awakening. And then the story unfolds of the teaching of liberation. But where's the body in all this? And here's what I'd like you to consider for today. That in fact, the very beginning of the story was intended as, I'm going to say, to show us the opposite of what we have interpreted. The body and all its senses, it is a palace. It is glorious. It is fragrant and full of flowers and dancers. Everything he was given that we look down on as a reflection of materialism was magnificent and is available to every one of us. The physical world is a sanctuary, is glorious. But if we hold it as ultimately real and with attachment, then it becomes a poison. And so he had to see the fullness of the physical world, which is, yes, it is a castle, yes, it is a kingdom, yes, it is gold and flowers and scents. But just remember, at some point you got to let it all go. Just remember, you got to let it all go. And to really integrate that and understand that, he went to that other extreme to say, what if I just try to do without the body altogether? And the answer is not on this planet. You're here in a body to experience your body. All your illnesses, all your setbacks, all your brain chemistry, all your senses. It's what you're here for. It's not to depart. He could have departed long before, but instead, no, it's the middle way. It's not pure emptiness and spirit on earth, and it's not only materialism. It is the union of the two, the integration of the conscious embrace of all that is with its fullness while knowing its emptiness. That's cool, huh? And so in the end, what he actually awakens to under the tree is what I would describe as metaphorically a return to where you came from. Except through the change in perception, he no longer needed only the material gifts of gold and scent and pleasure to see it and feel it. By transforming his vision, the world became his palace. The world became his pleasure. Every human became his lover, and he could live without need or attachment to any of it. That's pretty awesome, right? That means you can go into the grocery store and delight in every color of every vegetable and fruit and box of cereal and see the wholeness of the universe before you, inside you. Not on a mountaintop, not in a cave. And yes, moments like these, the odd book or song or story can reconnect us, but the power is on us. The power is ever present. And there's a lot to say about this because I can't help but feel that in this part of the world where materialism reigns supreme and dominates government and education and healthcare, if you don't have material strength, good luck finding peace around here. There's a lot to say. But the truth can't be hidden. The real meaning of the story persists because it's not made by people, it's spirit, and it arises, and it arises, and it arises, and what we realize is it's not in the stuff, it's in the way we experience the stuff. And when it's out there, it becomes dangerous. And when it's in here, we realize it's all good. It's all beautiful. Whatever we have, a lot or a little, what we want or what we don't, it's all sacred. It's all divine. And through our senses, we can find bliss and pleasure almost anywhere, almost at any moment, and yes, even in hard times. But the thing I want to end on, and I'll tell you, what communicates the energy of this ending point, I think is well felt through a song that Megan has graciously learned and offered to sing. This distorted relationship to the material world is not a small thing, and I'm going to leave you something very big to think about, since I haven't yet. I'm sort of joking. The way the world has tried to shame you from having a rich relationship with your body is the same way the world has shamed women for being women. And we have all suffered. The transition of human history and human consciousness marked when we were all of the earth, where we all lived in community, where there were matriarchs and patriarchs, where women were ritual leaders and healers and drummers and priestesses. But there came a time when there was a split perceived between the physical and the spiritual, and all that sex and all that wildness and all that deep joy had to be made other. Build the fortress walls high. Keep the wolves out. Keep the women at home. And slowly we moved into industrialism and war and finance as the markers of a country's success. And you ask any mother alive, and if she sits long enough, no matter where she's from, and no matter how she votes, one day in herself, she will tell you in tears, that's bullshit. A mother, imagine a mother ruling a village and saying, we will only give medicine to some. But the kids of my sister and the kids of my aunt, well, if they didn't work hard enough, too bloody bad. The story of the Buddha, of Jesus, the great stories of our life have been retold to us to push down the material world so that we forget the beauty of the earth, the beauty of the feminine, and yes, I would say even the wild, powerful beauty of women that is not defined by what men want from them. It is defined by what comes from them, whatever that is, on their terms. The journey of awakening is not just about escaping this world and knowing that all this is transient. It's about having the fierce clarity to embrace it all, so that every being, male, female, and however anyone understands themselves, finds their place in that tree of life that the Buddha awakened to. The work of awakening is fierce. It's fierce. It's hard to find balance, but it's possible. That's what the Buddha knew. And just as he did, you can set your hand on the earth. In fact, close your eyes for a moment. And let's imagine each one of us find a beautiful tree to sit under in your mind's eye. Imagine you setting your hand down on the earth. Imagine the flow of her wisdom coming in through your fingertips. Imagine the clouds above you. Imagine the scent of Denver spring lilacs filling your senses. Imagine your interconnection, the power, the beauty of your senses. And then imagine the way the world asks you to play that down, to be a being of thought and ideas, and in your heart is the courage to say, no, it's all important. It's all good. The liberation of one is the liberation of all. And this was the call of the Buddha, to live for the liberation of all beings everywhere.
Was a broken thing, had a voice, but I could not sing. You would wind me down. I struggled on the ground. Oh, so lost, the line had been crossed. Had a voice that I could not talk. You held me down. I struggled to fly now. But there's a scream inside that we all try to hide. We hold on so tight that we cannot deny. Eats us alive. Oh, eats us alive. Oh, yes, there's a scream inside that we all try to hide. But we hold on so tight. I don't wanna die. No, I don't wanna die. Yeah. I find myself in my melodies. I sing for love, I sing for me. I shout it out like a bird set free. No, I don't care if I sing off key. I find myself in my melodies. I sing for love, I sing for me. I shout it out like a bird set free. Oh. I shout it out like a bird set free. Now I fly high, hit all the high notes. I have a voice, hear me roar tonight. You held me down, but I fought back loud. Oh, yes, there's a scream inside that we all try to hide, but we hold on so tight. Oh, eats us alive. That scream, it eats us alive. Oh, yes, there's a scream inside that we all try to hide. Oh, hold on so tight, but I don't want to die. Don't want to die, yeah. I don't care if I sing off key. I find myself in my melodies. I sing for love, I sing for me. I shout it out like a bird set free. No, I don't care if I sing off key. I find myself in my melodies. I sing for love, I sing for me. Oh, I call it out like a bird set free. Oh. I shouted out like a bird set free. Yeah, where is your voice? Shout it out, can you love with me? Love this world, love this free way with me. Call it out, let that scream unleash. Yeah, shout it out like a bird set free. No longer pushed down, no longer without voice. Oh, I shout it out like a bird set free.
Such Singing in the Wild Branches by Mary Oliver. It was spring, and I finally heard him among the first leaves. Then I saw him clutching the limb in an island of shade with his red-brown feathers, all trim and neat for the new year. First I stood still and thought of nothing. Then I began to listen. And then I was filled with gladness, and that's when it happened. When I seemed to float, to be myself, a wing or a tree, and I began to understand what the bird was saying, and the sands in the glass stopped for a pure white moment, while gravity sprinkled upward like rain rising, and in fact, it became difficult to tell just what it was that was singing. It was the thrush for sure, but it seemed not a single thrush, but himself and all his brothers, and also the trees around him, as well as the gliding long-tailed clouds in the perfect blue sky. All of them were singing. And of course, so it seemed, so was I. Such soft and solemn and perfect music doesn't last. For more than a few moments, it's one of those magical places wise people like to talk about. One of the things they say about it that is true is that once you've been there, you're there forever. Listen, everyone has a chance. Is it spring? Is it morning? Are there trees near you? And does your own soul need comforting? Quick then, open the door and fly on your heavy feet. The song may already be drifting away.
Well, this is the time when we call our ushers to come forward. And I'm also going to call the scent bearers to come forward as well. And this is a time where we build community together, because the truth is there is no us and them. I've said that before. We aren't up here doing this for you. We're doing this with you. We do it together. Your donations, your gifts, every penny, every dollar, every hour of service, it's what keeps our lights on and brings musicians and vibrations and fragrances. It's what keeps this alive and growing. And so as the baskets come around to receive. Your generosity, the saints are also coming around to give to you, to awaken you. So take your time. And yes, we started a little late because of marathons, and we'll end a little late because of marathons, but savor each moment, every scent and song before our ceremony comes to a close. Thank you all.
To the creative source of all that is, we dedicate these gifts to the work of this community, that we may demonstrate a fellowship of faith, that we may express a living hope filled with kindness. Guide us that we may bring compassion into action. We donate these generous gifts to the work of this congregation so that we can affirm our lives within it.
So you can continue to circulate the fragrance while we go into our final song. And, but it's time.
Okay, this morning we're going to do a chant, and we're going to teach it to you really quick. Actually, Dr. Jonathan and Megan and I will go through it once, and then you can just join us. Dr. Jonathan's going to be playing on the drum, but what I do while he's playing on the drum is I kind of repeat that on my solar plexus, and it kind of creates the rhythm within your body as well as the melody. So please stand as you're able, and join us in the one body chant. One breath, one body, one life in all, one precious blessing that we share. And we, though many, throughout the world, we are one body in this one
Well, I don't know about you, but I was better than I imagined. We have so many people to be grateful for today. First, to awaken our senses, Marilyn just ducked out of the room, but thank you for coming. And you can visit with her in the back. And welcome her, of course, back to Althea. Melissa, for the great journey, the sound of the great journey. Stephen, for your ever-present genius. And everyone who makes it work, Doug and the sound, and Beverly and others who bring the flowers, and the greeters, and the ushers, and our kitchen volunteers, everybody. And of course, I have to say, to Megan for learning that song. You know, she just came into town, and I was like frantic to find someone who had the power and the capacity to bring this song to us. And Sandra Wong said, well, you know, she gets in like Friday night, and I think she has a cold, but maybe she could learn it on Saturday. And I was like, give me a break. This song is like an anthem for the ages. Who's going to possibly do that Saturday night? And it's Megan, so thank you, Melissa. So, don't forget, we have a beautiful lunch waiting for you momentarily. If you're new, please be our guest. If you would like a special prayer or healing blessing from our prayer partners, they will be in the historic library. Now, we have lots of other things we reminded you of, so keep your programs with you. Don't forget all the classes coming up. Doug's start date on June 3rd. And most significantly, we do have one request, which is after our prayer. If you would spare 5 minutes, Daryl, our fearless song leader, thank you, Daryl, will be upstairs. He's overseeing the renovation of the floor with Davis. If any of you could just go for 5 minutes, pick up one thing, move it to another hallway, and then you can go have your lunch. We can get that all done really quick. So Daryl will be upstairs. For those of you that can help and use your senses and your bodies, we would be grateful. On that note, let's close. And thank you, brother, for your help. It's the Sacred Movement Room and Classroom, top of the stairs. All right, so let's take a moment. Close your eyes if you'd like to, and join us in a moment of feeling gratitude. Gratitude for the senses. Gratitude for the design and elegance of this universe. Gratitude to our source, the one that is all, God, Spirit, the mystery that is us. May we be brave enough to be truly alive through all that we are and have become, our brokenness, our beauty, our taste, our touch, our smell, our sense of place, of people, of direction, of energy. Let us live as fully integrated sensory beings. Dear God, we give thanks for the feast of blessings that you have surrounded us with. And it is our prayer that through this great awakening, we would celebrate and reclaim all that we are as individuals, as a community, as a species, as a planet, a place for all, the power of all, the beauty of all, so that we might know harmony and healing for all. Amen.
Thank you.